The Arizona sun pounded down on the cracked desert earth, baking the military training ground into a shimmering wasteland of sweat, metal, and reputation. Dust drifted through the air like smoke as soldiers moved in tight routines loading magazines. Zeroing optics, calling wind direction. Today wasn't a standard range qualification. It was a high-stakes, invite-only long-distance precision shooting challenge hosted by the U.S. Army's Advanced Marksmanship Division. Among the group of elite snipers and seasoned marksmen stood a name no one recognized, Private Mason Quinn. He didn't wear the swagger of experience. His boots were too clean, his face too smooth, and his uniform too freshly pressed. While others leaned on their rifles and joked about past deployments, Mason stood alone, kneeling beside a heavy Pelican case containing his rifle. He wasn't watching others shoot. He was watching the wind roll off the hills, eyes squinting. Toward the steel plate bolted into a rocky outcrop nearly 2,800 yards away. That was the target. It was nicknamed the Ghost Plate. Few had ever hit it, and none had done so under pressure. Even GPS-guided weapons sometimes struggled at that range. The shot required accounting for the curvature of the earth, bullet drop, spin drift, barometric, pressure, and wind patterns that changed with every foot of altitude. Most shooters wouldn't even try. Standing nearby was General Carl Beckett, a combat-hardened legend who'd spent more time under fire than most of the young shooters had been alive. His presence added gravity to the event. When Beckett observed a range test, it meant results were going straight to the top dot. He walked with calm authority, steel gray hair peeking out beneath his cap, arms behind his back, watching shooters. From behind mirrored sunglasses. Everyone noticed when he stopped in front of Mason. "You the new guy?" he asked, voice deep and dry like gravel. Mason stood, back straight. "Yes, sir. Private Quinn, sir." Beckett looked him over. "That your rifle?" Mason nodded once. Custom-built .338 Lapua Magnum. Carbon fiber chassis. 27-inch match grade. Barrel. Night Force ATACR 7-35X optic. The general arched an eyebrow, impressed by the specs, but not the man. Big words. "You planning to hit the Ghost Plate with that thing?" Mason looked toward the horizon. "Yes, sir." That made the general chuckle. Loud enough for others to hear. "Only legends hit that far, Private. You're about 20 years too green to be calling your shot." The comment drew a few laughs from the surrounding shooters, including Sergeant Hoyle, a former SOCOM sniper who had previously held the base's distance record. Hoyle slapped Mason lightly on the shoulder. "Don't worry, rookie. Nobody expects you to hit it. We'll chalk it up as practice." Mason didn't reply. He simply turned back to his gear, calmly unzipping the rifle case and assembling his weapon with meticulous attention. Every movement was controlled, every click of metal. On metal, precise. He attached a suppressor, adjusted the bipod, and began inputting environmental data into a small ballistic calculator clipped to his vest. "Looks like he's trying to split atoms," someone muttered. Beckett shook his head, half amused. "This ought to be entertaining." Mason didn't hear them. Or maybe he did, and simply chose not to care. His focus had narrowed. The rifle became part of his body. His world shrank to distance, wind, steel, and silence. The other shooters continued warming up, firing at closer targets, 600, 800, 1,200 yards. Their shots cracked like thunder in the dry air. Spotters called impacts and corrections. Radios chirped with wind calls and dope adjustments. Mason stayed in his lane, watching the heat shimmer around the Ghost Plate. When his name was called over the loudspeaker, the range went quiet. Shooter, Private Mason Quinn. Target, Ghost Plate, 2,800 yards. He walked to the line. Beckett leaned in to one of the instructors. Let's see if the kid can even get close. Mason lay prone, dug his elbows into the dirt, and nestled the rifle into his shoulder. He made final scope adjustments, sensed his breathing, and began counting seconds between gusts of wind. A small breeze lifted the back of his collar. In the silence, even the snapping of a branch could be heard across the line. He inhaled deeply, exhaled, and waited. One last check. His finger touched the trigger. Mason Quinn's finger rested gently on the trigger, not moving. His breathing had slowed to near stillness, and the muscles in his arms were relaxed, but coiled, like a predator ready to strike. But his mind wasn't in Arizona anymore. Was on a windswept ridge in the Montana backcountry, 16 years old, lying in the snow next to a grizzled old man who smelled like tobacco and pine sap. His grandfather, Cal Quinn, had been a Vietnam-era Marine Scout sniper and Mason's only mentor in life after his parents passed in a winter car crash when he was 6. Cal had raised Mason off-grid. No TV, no video games, no city noise. Just rifles, survival, and lessons that stuck to the bone. On that Montana ridge, Mason had aimed at a moving elk over 1,100 yards away, breathing sharp in the frozen air. "You missed that shot. We go hungry." Cal had whispered. It wasn't a threat. It was just truth. That shot had hit the elk behind the shoulder. One shot. Clean. They hauled it back using nothing but rope, legs, and grit. Back on the Arizona range, Mason blinked and let the memory fade. He was ready. He knew that others on the line were probably rolling their eyes, waiting for the inevitable miss. No one believed the rookie would hit. But Mason didn't need belief. He needed physics and instinct. And he had both. He read the mirage rolling across the ground, feeling the wind speed change with the terrain. He'd already accounted for spin, drift, Coriolis effect, humidity, and density altitude. He ran no weather station, didn't use some robotic rig or spotter. He did it like his grandfather taught him, by feel, by memory, and by respect for the shot. One breath in, half a breath out, trigger squeeze gentle, clean, controlled. The rifle bucked back with a deep, muffled report. The suppressor dulled the thunder, but it didn't mute the precision. Silence fell. Beckett frowned. Everyone watched the ghost plate. It was so far away that even the sound of impact, if it came, would take several seconds to arrive. Then thunk. It wasn't just a hit. It was a center mass impact. The steel plate rang like a church bell, swaying slightly from the force. White paint cracked and flaked around the impact site. Mason didn't move. He racked the bolt, chambered another round, made a micro-adjustment, and fired again. Silence. Thunk. Another center hit. This time, nobody laughed. No one even breathed. Beckett adjusted his sunglasses. "That can't be right," he muttered. Mason fired a third round. The plate jumped once more. Thunk. 3 shots. 3 hits. At a distance most seasoned veterans wouldn't even attempt in. A live trial. There was no emotion in Mason's expression. He simply let out a slow breath, safe behind his rifle, as if confirming what he already knew. Downrange, spotters scrambled to replay their feeds, cross-check angles, and confirm the miraculous consistency. The telemetry showed a nearly identical flight path on all 3 rounds, each accounting for changes in elevation, wind, and temperature. Sergeant Hoyle, the former record holder, stood still, lips pressed tight. He looked at Beckett, who hadn't moved a muscle. The general finally broke the silence. "Confirm the impacts," he said flatly. "Confirmed, sir," a spotter called back, voice cracking slightly. 3 direct hits, center mass, no edge strikes. That rookie just nailed the ghost plate 3 times in a row. Beckett stared down at the data tablet in his hand, scrolling through the impact readings. They were real. The machine didn't Lie. Mason had done what only legends were rumored to do. The general turned and looked at the young man, who was already unloading his rifle, treating the moment like a regular day at the office. "What's your background, Private?" Beckett asked as he approached. Mason looked up, polite and unshaken. "Montana, sir. You shoot like that often back home?" "Only when the wind picks up," Mason replied. A few snipers nearby exchanged glances. One even chuckled quietly, in disbelief. It was the kind of answer that sounded like a joke, but no one dared assume Mason was joking now. Beckett raised an eyebrow. "You do realize what you just accomplished?" "I hit what I aimed at, sir." The general nodded slowly. "You did more than that." Mason nodded back. "Then I'll aim farther next time." For a brief second, Beckett stared at the rookie like a man seeing a ghost. Then he turned away, motioned for the range officers to begin their analysis, and said quietly to his aide, "Get that footage locked down. Send it up the chain. Somebody's going to want to see this kid shoot again." Mason picked up his rifle case, slung it over his shoulder, and walked away from the firing line as calmly as he had arrived, leaving behind stunned silence and a steel plate that would never look the same again. The hum of generators and distant radio chatter filled the hot afternoon air, but no one near the range line was talking. The silence after Mason Quinn's 3 perfect shots stretched awkwardly, like the moment after lightning when everyone waits for thunder. But the thunder never came. Instead, General Carl Beckett stood motionless, arms folded, lips pressed in a tight line. His sunglasses reflected the desert landscape, but his expression was unreadable. Around him, instructors and spotters gathered in hushed clusters, replaying footage, confirming telemetry, checking calculations again and again, hoping to find some margin of error that would make the impossible explainable. They found none. Each round fired from Mason's rifle had followed a near-identical ballistic arc. The bullet drop, wind drift, barometric correction, all had been executed with mechanical precision. There had been no overcompensation, no margin of luck. He hadn't clipped the plate. He had centered it. 3 times. Sergeant Hoyle, who once bragged about hitting at 2,100 yards under high wind conditions, hadn't moved either. His arms hung at his sides, rifle untouched. He looked over at Mason, who was kneeling beside his case again, wiping down his scope and dusting the suppressor like a mechanic cleaning tools after a simple oil change. Beckett turned to his aide. "Get me that rookie's record." The aide fumbled with his tablet, fingers sweating under pressure. "Yes, sir." "Pulling it now." A minute later, the general was scrolling through Mason's profile. Age, 22. Hometown, Libby, Montana. Education, high school only. No college. Enlisted straight into infantry at 19. Transferred to sniper school after scoring top percentile. In marksmanship evaluations, graduated top of class. No prior deployment. No combat experience. Beckett frowned. "How long's he been active duty?" The aide hesitated. 9 months, sir." 9 months, Beckett repeated quietly, almost to himself. "And no combat tours?" "No, sir." Beckett looked back toward the range. That shot should have taken years of battlefield exposure. He just made a $1,000 ballistic computer look obsolete. A corporal walked up from the spotter pit, holding a printed shot grouping diagram. "Sir, I thought you might want this." Beckett glanced at it. 3 dots dead center. Tight. Enough to overlap on a smaller target. His hand hovered above the paper, then slowly lowered. He didn't take it. Instead, he started walking toward Mason. The others stepped aside instinctively. Beckett approached the rookie, who looked up and stood respectfully, hands behind his back. Beckett studied him for a long moment. "Private Quinn, right?" "Yes, sir." "You always shoot like that?" Mason hesitated, thinking. "Only when I need to, sir." Beckett snorted softly. Not a laugh, not a scoff. Something else. You ever hear of Gunnery Sergeant Cal Quinn? Mason nodded once. He was my grandfather. Beckett nodded too, more slowly. I thought so. I met him once. Iraq, 2003. He was a range consultant for Marine Recon. That man hit a target at 2,200 yards with a borrowed rifle in high wind and told nobody. Mason didn't speak, but the corner of his mouth twitched like he'd heard that story before. Did he train you? Beckett asked. All my life, sir. That explains it. There was a long pause. The wind kicked up faintly, stirring the dust at their feet. Beckett's voice dropped lower. That was the best shooting I've ever seen on this range. No ego, no drama. Just execution. You made it look like a Sunday walk. Thank you, sir. I mocked you earlier, Beckett added plainly. Didn't expect you to prove me wrong. I wasn't trying to, sir. That made Beckett finally smile. A thin, sharp line on his weathered face. That's exactly why you did. Behind them, others had started talking again quietly, cautiously, but no one dared interrupt. Beckett turned toward the firing line. You just made a lot of good shooters rethink what they thought was possible. Mason remained still. It wasn't luck, sir. I know that. Beckett turned back toward his aide. Put him on the rotation for the next evaluation cycle. And bump his file up to Colonel Harlan. Tell him we may have something here. Something, sir? Beckett nodded slowly. We've got a ghost in uniform. He looked at Mason one last time, then walked away. Mason bent back down, packed his gear, and slung his rifle over his shoulder dot as he walked away from the line. He didn't notice Sergeant Hoyle, following a few steps behind, watching him closely. Not with envy, with curiosity. With the quiet respect of a man who just saw his throne handed to someone younger, sharper, and far more dangerous. Mason didn't look back. He didn't need to. The footage didn't stay local for long. Within 24 hours, Mason Quinn's perfect shots had been clipped, cropped, and encrypted. The raw video captured from 3 angles, including overhead drone, was labeled confidential eyes only and sent up the chain of command. It landed first on the desk of Colonel Harlan, head of Precision Infantry Systems, who watched it 3 times without speaking. He didn't flinch at the shots themselves. What got him was the time between trigger pull and impact, the poise, the total lack of overcorrection, and the eerie consistency of the groupings. He called his assistant in. Who is this Quinn kid? The assistant scrolled through the personnel file. Private Mason J. Quinn, active 9 months, stationed at Fort Briggs. Top marks in sniper school. No deployments? No combat? None, sir. No ops? None, sir. He's just a rookie. Harlan leaned back in his chair. Well, not anymore. By the following morning, Mason's name was circulating among units that didn't usually notice privates. Black file teams. Ghost units. Joint Special Operations Command. Nobody moved quickly in the Pentagon unless it involved the impossible. And a rookie triple tagging a 2,800-yard plate on a flat wind day with no spotter? That wasn't just a sniper's feat. That was surgical. That was science fiction. Meanwhile, Mason knew none of it. He was back in the barracks, cleaning his rifle alone, the same way he had every day since boot. While others went into town or hit the gym, Mason broke his rifle down piece by piece, checking each spring and thread for imperfections. His routine was obsessive, but not for show. It was personal. Every click of metal, every smooth rag swipe, was muscle memory passed down from someone who no longer lived. As he polished the firing pin, Sergeant Hoyle stepped into the room. Quinn, he said, arms crossed. Mason didn't look up. Sergeant, you make any sense of what happened out there yesterday? I hit the plate, Hoyle nodded. Yeah, 3 times. That plate's older than half the shooters on base. You made it sound like it owed you money. Mason finally looked up. Meeting Hoyle's eyes, I only shot what was given to me. Hoyle leaned against the bunk, his tone softening. You know Beckett's a hard man to impress, right? I've never seen him look like that. Like what? Like a man who just realized someone out there's better than him and 20 years younger. Mason said nothing. He simply reassembled the bolt, locked it into the chamber, and did a final pressure test. Then came the knock. 3 short raps. A corporal entered. Private Quinn, you've been summoned. Now. Mason stood up without asking where. He was driven, not walked, to a secure operations building on the far end of Base 1, with no windows and 2 guards out front, with rifles at port arms. Inside, General Beckett sat at the end of a long table. He wasn't alone this time. 2 men in civilian suits flanked him, quiet, unreadable, not smiling. Mason, Beckett said, motioning to the seat. Mason sat. The general folded his hands. You've got people upstairs asking questions. Big questions. Mason didn't reply. Beckett gestured to the footage, paused on a screen. They've all seen this. Not once, not twice. But enough to know it wasn't a fluke. Mason watched the screen as his prone figure pulled the trigger, then another angle showing the steel plate ringing seconds later. One of the civilians spoke, calm but sharp. We've been watching that plate for years. It doesn't get hit, especially not 3 times in under 30 seconds. I had a clear read, Mason answered. The second man leaned forward. Where did you learn to calculate winged-off mirage like that? My grandfather? Military? Yes, sir. Marine Scout sniper. What did he teach you? 2. Shoot once, make it count. The room fell quiet for a moment. Beckett tapped the folder. You're being pulled from base rotation. Mason blinked. Sir? You've been reassigned. Special evaluation tasking. Effective immediately. Pack your gear. You leave at 06:00 tomorrow. Mason straightened. Where to? Undisclosed. You'll be briefed in transit. The civilian closest to him slid a sealed envelope across the table. This doesn't leave your hands. Your life's about to change, drastically. Mason opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a black card with no markings, except a silver emblem in the center. An elk's head with a single crosshair between the eyes. Below it, a Cody name. Ghost Elk. Beckett stood. You've earned your way into the shadows, son. Just remember legends. Don't get told until they're dead. And you're not dead yet. Mason looked down at the card, then folded it and slipped it into his chest pocket. He stood and saluted. Thank you, sir. As he walked out of the room, one of the civilians muttered quietly to Beckett, That boy doesn't flinch. Beckett nodded once. That's because he's not just a shooter. He's a weapon. The blacked-out helicopter lifted off just before sunrise, slicing through the early desert wind like a blade. Inside, Mason Quinn sat in the rear seat with his rifle case strapped beside him. No patch marked his name. No insignia marked his. Rank, the only sign of who he was, came from the card in his pocket, black, silver stamped with the emblem of an elk, pierced by a crosshair. No one spoke. The 2 other operatives in the cabin wore plain combat fatigues and mirrored sunglasses. Eyes forward, still as statues. Where they were going wasn't on any map. The pilot didn't announce their heading. Even the flight computer had been scrubbed. As far as the Army was concerned, Mason Quinn no longer existed. His transfer orders had been burned. His locker emptied. His barracks assignment replaced. At precisely 0600 hours, the chopper touched. Down on a concrete pad outside a facility built into the side of a remote cliff range. Gray steel doors opened automatically as armed guards emerged. No patches, no ranks, just purpose. Mason was led down a steel corridor, through biometric checkpoints, and into a room lined with soundproof panels. There was no window. Just one long metal table, 3 chairs, and a sealed case. Waiting for him was Colonel Harlan. He stood with both hands on the table, watching Mason approach. You're about to be part of something very few people even know exists. You've proven you can hit the impossible. Now let's see if you can survive it. Harlan motioned to the sealed case. One of the guards opened it, revealing a new rifle longer barrel, carbon-reinforced stock, customized action, and an experimental optic system Mason had only read about in classified journals. This is the Ghost Reaper. Top-of-the-line ballistics integration, calibrated for high-altitude and long-range warfare. Yours, if you can master it. Mason ran his fingers across the stock, checking the weight, balance, and chamber alignment without even being asked. It wasn't just a rifle. It was a promise. You'll be sent into environments where one shot changes outcomes, Harlan continued. No support, no backup, no recognition. You'll be a myth wrapped in a shadow. Mason met the colonel's gaze. Who am I working for? You're working for the kind of people who don't speak in rooms like this. Training began that afternoon. For weeks, Mason was pushed past every known limit. Not physically, he had always been tough, but mentally. He trained in silence, spending hours at unknown ranges where targets appeared across vast canyon ridges. Through fog, against black rock under starlight, he learned how to shoot through rain, snow, sandstorms, and across water. He was taught to hide in plain sight, to shoot and vanish, to never need a second shot. Each instructor was a ghost themselves, former CIA, JSOC, and foreign units whose names had been erased. But one by one, they grew silent when Mason stepped behind the scope. He never missed. On day 22, they put him in a live simulation, a moving target, at over 2,900 yards, with a 14-second window. He hit it in 11 on day 30. A drone recorded his shot as it passed through a 10-inch gap in a metal barrier, then shot at a target behind it at 3,000 yards. On day 45, they stopped testing him. They started preparing missions. Back at Fort Briggs, Sergeant Hoyle stood near. The firing range, staring at the ghost plate still dented from Mason's shots. Rumor had it they'd retired the plate from all future qualifications. No one was allowed to shoot at it again. It had become a monument. Some recruits whispered about the rookie who vanished after hitting it 3 times. Some claimed he died in a secret op. Others swore he was in Alaska testing experimental sniper systems. But those who were closer to the brass knew better. They knew he wasn't dead. He was just somewhere else, and growing more dangerous by the day. One night, deep in the mountain compound, Mason stood in a glass-walled room, watching footage of global crisis zones, civil wars, nuclear leaks, rogue generals, and cartel uprisings. Each marked on the map with a red dot. Colonel Harlan entered behind him, arms folded. "There's a mission coming," he said. Mason turned slightly. "Where?" "Classified." Mason nodded once. "You won't be shooting steel plates anymore." Harlan added, "You'll be shooting people who change wars, politicians, mercenaries, generals, the kind of men whose deaths never make headlines but keep the world from burning." "I understand," Mason said. "Do you?" Harlan asked. "Because once you pull that trigger, you don't come back. You can't go home. You can't call your friends. You can't even die in uniform. You become a rumor, a threat whispered at intelligence briefings." Mason looked at the red dots glowing on the map. "I never signed up to be known," he replied. "I signed up to make a difference." Harlan looked at him quietly, then stepped forward and handed him a sealed mission file. "Then here's your difference." Mason opened the file. 1 page, 1 name, 1 bullet, and only 1 man who could deliver it from 3,000 yards. Mason Quinn stared at the page. No photo, no background. Just a name, a location, and a single line beneath it. Terminate. No witness. No trace. The location was vague. A mountain compound outside Dushanbe, Tajikistan. High altitude, heavy winds. Unknown terrain, zero backup. The target was a foreign arms dealer working between rogue states and militant networks. His last 5 deals had armed factions responsible for over 4,000 deaths. He was too slippery for governments to indict, too dangerous to ignore, and too careful for drones or direct extraction. That left Mason at 0300 the next morning. He was in the air. No unit name on his orders. No mission designation. Even his transport pilot didn't know who he was. Just a sealed flight manifest labeled GHOSTIs only. The halo drop was silent and exact. Mason landed 7 miles from the target, hidden under the blackness of a new moon. No sound, no light. Just snow, ice, and the mountain wind howling over the ridges like wolves. He moved slowly, camouflaged in thermals and white over gray winter gear. The rifle strapped across his back was the Ghost Reaper customized for the shot he had to take. At over 2,900 yards, elevation was both an advantage and a curse. It gave him line of sight, but magnified every mistake in the math. Mason spent 3 hours just crawling to the final ridge, eyes locked on the distant lights of the compound. Through his scope, he saw movement. 10 men on patrol. No standard uniforms. They wore stolen patches from 4 different nations' mercenaries for hire. Every one of them armed with military-grade gear. The target was in a central cabin, windows blacked out. A chimney puffed faintly. Mason adjusted his scope, checked the reticle against the mountain's natural slope, calculated wind vectors, and confirmed time to impact. 5.2 seconds. He waited dot at exactly 0417. The door opened. A man stepped out, tall, heavy coat, no hat. He looked both ways, lit a cigarette, and stretched his neck like someone used to not fearing the dark. The face matched the file. Mason's breathing slowed. He squeezed out the shot, left the chamber with a suppressed crack, barely louder than the wind. The bullet passed through thin air, slicing over valleys, catching cold currents, and then dash impact. The man dropped instantly. Not a stumble. Not a yell. Just down. By the time his bodyguards turned, Mason was already crawling backward into the snow, rifle wrapped, boot prints covered. It took 26 hours to exfil by foot, moving by night, resting during the white daylight under a thermal blanket buried in snow. A drone extracted him silently from a marked cliff edge at 0430 the next day. The mission never existed. No press releases. No acknowledgments. The compound burned in a generator fire 2 days later. No suspects. No arrests. But in the intelligence community, rumors started to swirl. The kill was too clean. Too far. Too fast. Some said it was a drone. Others blamed local rivals. But a few insiders whispered the same name. Ghost Elk. Back at the mountain facility. Mason handed over his gear for debrief. Colonel Harlan waited for him inside a bare briefing room, arms folded. "You made the shot," Harlan said without smiling. Mason nodded. Double quotes, "No witnesses." "None. No surveillance breach?" "Confirmed. Clean." Harlan tossed a small black patch across the table. It showed the same silver elk emblem, now with a number beneath it. "1, you've earned your first," Harlan said. "Welcome to the ledger." Mason took it and slid it into his vest pocket. Beside the mission card, he never threw away. "The world's full of men who think they can't be touched." Harlan continued. "You're the proof they're wrong." Mason met his eyes. "This won't be the last." "No," Harlan said. "It won't. But that shot, that one will echo." He wasn't wrong. A week later, Inside a secured Pentagon analysis room, 3 senior officials reviewed the aftermath. Satellite photos, heat maps, audio intercepts. Nothing showed the shooter. Nothing gave any trace. Only the damage remained. One of the men leaned back in his chair. "You sure it was that ghost program?" "Has to be. No drone could have done it. No sniper we know can hit at 2,900 in those winds. They're turning him into a myth." The analyst flipped through notes. "He was mocked at Briggs just weeks ago." "Now?" the general said grimly. "Now he's writing doctrine." Back at Fort Briggs, the firing range was unusually quiet. No one talked near the ghost plate anymore. It had been repainted, but not reused. A small plaque now rested beneath it. Not official. Not from the army. Just 3 words, carved in by hand. "One shot echoes." And beneath it, scratched faintly, as if by someone who'd once stood there and understood what they saw, Q. Over the next 6 months, Mason Quinn became a name, whispered only in code. No photo. No confirmed operations. No record of flights, kills, or even deployments. But outcomes shifted quietly in war rooms across continents. Rogue leaders who once met in heavily guarded bunkers now met underground, or not at all. Cartels adjusted shipping routes overnight. Mercenary outfits folded without explanation. Each incident had one thing in common. Single bullet dot and no trace of the shooter. At the mountain facility, Mason was beginning to change. Not in ability, he remained sharp, precise, unshaken. But in solitude. With every mission, he became more distant, more mechanical. Like the recoil of his rifle had started to push his soul backward with every shot. Colonel Harlan noticed. One night, he called Mason into the observation deck, overlooking the facility's firing range. "You've been gone more than you've been here," Harlan said quietly. "I go where the missions are," Mason replied. Hands in his jacket pockets, Harlan looked at him, brow furrowed. "You're not a machine, Quinn. Don't become one. Legends aren't built just on kills. They're built on judgment." Mason didn't reply. He watched the white targets downrange. Instead, each one barely visible under the low floodlights. "Paper ghosts. How many men have you shot?" Harlan asked suddenly. Mason looked away. "I don't keep count. You should." The colonel tossed something onto the table, a worn-out playing card, torn and folded. On it was a drawing of a ghost elk, identical to Mason's mission patches. But this one had a red X through it. "What is this?" Mason asked. "Your next assignment. The ghost elk isn't invisible anymore. The mission came from higher." Then Harlan. It had bypassed every normal channel and was marked emergency eyes only. A high-ranking U.S. intelligence official had been captured during a secret negotiation in West Africa. Held by a splinter faction, deep in a jungle compound, and being moved to an undisclosed location within 36 hours. Rescue was off the table. Assassination wasn't. The ghost elk was being sent not to eliminate a terrorist, but to eliminate the threat of knowledge falling into enemy hands. The target? Not a warlord. Not a foreign general. The target was the American asset himself. Mason stared at the briefing. "You're asking me to kill one of ours?" "He was compromised," Harlan said firmly. "He knows too much. If they break him, 10 black programs die overnight. There's no chance of extraction?" "None. They're moving him constantly. By the time a team could mobilize, he'll be in an underground site. We won't find him again." Mason sat silently, eyes fixed on the map. "This isn't a shot," he muttered. "It's a silence." "You're a ghost, Mason," Harlan said. "Sometimes ghosts don't kill people. They erase possibilities." The jungle was wet, thick, and loud with insects. Mason moved through it like vapor. Hidden in moss-toned camo, face streaked with mud, He crept closer to the temporary encampment where the prisoner was kept. The target was under a makeshift canopy, guarded by 2 soldiers with AKs, a chain-link barrier, and a single generator throwing off just enough light for Mason to get a visual. His rifle was ready, but something felt off. Through his scope, he saw the prisoner's hands weren't bound. He wasn't shackled. He was laughing, joking with the guards. In their language, and then, quietly, he reached into his jacket and handed them something, a phone. Mason's heart stopped. He zoomed in. The guard stepped away as the man typed something quickly. His hands moved with purpose. The transmission icon flashed briefly on the screen. He was sending data. He wasn't a hostage, he was a defector. Mason exhaled slowly. This wasn't just a containment mission, it was a betrayal cleanup. He steadied. His shot, wind, 0. Distance, 873 yards. He adjusted elevation by instinct. Held his breath, fired. The bullet struck the man in the upper chest, right through the sternum. He collapsed immediately. The guard spun in panic. Mason fired once more, hit the generator. Darkness swallowed the camp. And as always, he vanished, by. The time he reached the extraction point, he felt the weight, not of the mission, but of the realization that ghosts were now being used not only to silence enemies, but to erase mistakes. American ones. At the mountain base, Harlan met him in the hangar, but this time he didn't speak first. I want to know who greenlit that op, Mason said coldly. You don't, Harlan replied. You just want to keep breathing. I didn't sign up to be a cleaner for political failures. You signed up to be a myth. Myths don't get morals. Mason turned away, lips pressed tight. I get one more shot, he said. And after that, I disappear for real. Harlan looked at him. One more. But when it's done, you don't just disappear. You don't come back. I never wanted to. 3 weeks passed. No missions. No orders. Just silence. Mason Quinn spent those days on the range alone, drilling in the wind, in the rain, with his rifle and his ghosts. At night, he studied classified case files, old missions, broken intel, chains, quiet deaths dressed up as strategy. He marked names, dates, patterns. He knew now what he had become. Not a legend. Not a hero. A scalpel used to cut cancer from the government. Until the cancer started growing hands of its own. Then came the final file. No briefing. No escort. Just a black envelope slid under his door. Inside, a photo. A name. A location. Target. General Pierce Holloway. Location. Confidential satellite. Summit, Luxembourg. Time. 72 hours. It stunned Mason. Holloway wasn't a traitor or a terrorist. He was the director of Strategic Cyber Command, decorated, respected, one of the few generals who had spoken openly against shadow programs like Ghost. So why was he marked? Then Mason noticed the signature at the bottom of the kill order. Approved. See, Harlan. That night, Mason stood outside Harlan's office. No knock. No salute. Just walked in. You signed this? He asked, dropping the file on Harlan's desk. Harlan didn't flinch. I did. Why? He's about to leak black budget details to a Senate Oversight Committee. If that happens, everything you've done goes public. Every mission, every kill, every lie. Mason's jaw tightened. He's not the threat. The program is. You are the program, Harlan said coldly. Without you, Ghost doesn't exist. Without Ghost, we lose 1,000 threats no one sees coming. And how many truths do we bury along the way? Silence. Mason turned to leave. I'll take the shot, he said. But not the one you expect. In Luxembourg, the summit was hosted inside a fortified embassy compound. The general was due to speak during a closed session on satellite warfare. His security detail was thick local police, NATO agents, and 2 private firms. But Mason didn't care about getting inside. He cared about watching. He took a position across the street, 4 stories up in an abandoned hotel, camouflaged beneath broken curtains and shattered glass. His rifle lay in pieces inside a hollowed-out guitar case. His suppressor hidden in a fire escape pipe. No digital trace. No signal. Just optics, breath, and silence. Through his scope, he spotted Holloway arriving at the gate, tall, silver hair. Calm face, a real soldier. Not a shadow. He was alone for 5 seconds before handlers swarmed. Mason followed his path into the building dot. Then he shifted his scope to the rooftop dot, where a second shooter was waiting. Not him. Someone else. Silencer. Fitted. Bipod deployed. No patch. No hesitation. A clean kill team, and Mason wasn't the only one sent. He inhaled, aligned his reticle. This shot would break the silence. The trigger pull was smooth. The first bullet hit the opposing sniper square in the eye. Scope shattering glass, then skull. The man dropped instantly, his rifle clattering to the rooftop tiles. Security scrambled. Mason packed his gear and vanished, before the alarms even echoed. But he left behind one thing. A steel-cased 7mm round on the sniper's chest, engraved with a single letter. 48 hours later, a secure room in Washington buzzed with panic. A general had almost been assassinated. The sniper who stopped it was untraceable. But the message was clear. Someone inside knew too much. And someone inside had chosen not to follow orders. Harlan watched the footage with clenched fists. Mason had disappeared. No signals. No sightings. His quarters at the facility were stripped clean. His tags were gone. His mission patches burned in the fireplace. His bunk made like no one had ever used it. On the table, one item had been left. Behind, that first brass mission card. The one that read, Ghost Elk, Clearance Alpha. Except now, one line was added in red ink. Legends shoot further, but some walk away. Months passed. Rumors started to grow. A Russian arms caravan found disabled in the mountains. Every driver dead, each with a single bullet hole through the heart. A warlord's helicopter shot down mid-flight over Sudan. No wreckage found except a twisted rotor and a spent casing lodged in a tree. Cartel convoy turned to ash along the Mexican ridge after a single sniper round hit a fuel line from over 2,000 yards. Every time, the kill was surgical. Every time, no one claimed responsibility. But local fighters spoke of him, of a ghost with eyes like ice, breath like the wind, and a rifle that never missed. They called him El Fantasma del Norte, the Phantom of the North. Back at Fort Briggs, the ghost plate was never touched again. New recruits stared at it like a shrine. The general, who had once mocked it, long since retired. Rumors said he refused interviews, never spoke of the range, and left his medals in a locked box in his basement. But one time, a journalist caught him outside a veterans gala, asked him if the story about the rookie sniper who beat the record was real. The general paused, then said only this: he wasn't a rookie. He was a reminder. A reminder of what? That when a legend is born, you better pray he stays on your side.